Today we're going to spend a little bit of time going through basic formatting, okay? Most of us have probably got a handle on basic formatting. We may all have little bits and pieces that are problematic. I've been a professional writer for 25 years and I sometimes make mistakes with formatting. So it's very, very easy to do and it's very, very easy to remedy. Okay, so by the end of this session, your screenwriting problems will be solved. One of the great things about screenwriting formatting is it's essentially the same across all platforms. That's because when you submit a screenplay, the point is that all screenplays look the same, right? The only thing that distinguishes your work from anyone else's is the quality of the work. The work speaks for itself. That's why all of our screenplays look the same, so that nobody has an unfair advantage because they have a flashy font or a picture of themselves on the cover. None of that counts, it's just about the work. And the same is true for formatting. Formatting is all the same across the board so that everyone is following the same rules, so that the work can be judged on its own merit, and also so that certain conventions are understood universally. There aren't a huge amount of rules with screenwriting, but the rules that there are mostly non-negotiable. You have to follow those rules or people will not read your work. And you want your work to be read because it's good, so you do not want formatting to be the thing that prevents your work from being read. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through some screenplay pages and just show you a few things so that you're reminded of the basics. So we're actually looking at a page of my screenplay so that you guys know I suffer the same things that you do, which is making sure our screenplays all look alike. So we're going to look at not the title page, although title pages of course are important. Always include the title page because without a title page, people don't know you wrote it, all right? So don't forget that, that's quite important. You don't need a huge amount of information. Usually an email address is enough. So on page 1 then of this particular screenplay, you'll see that we begin with fade in. Now fade in for many, many years was one of those non-negotiables. You absolutely had to have fade in on page 1. Now it seems to be that you don't, okay? So it's become a personal choice, although you might find if you're working with a certain director or on a certain television show that they want fade in, but you no longer have to have fade in on page 1 on the left-hand side to begin your script, okay? So that's one of those ones that is currently not required. That can change. Things change in the world of screenwriting, but at the moment you do not need this. Okay, so the next thing we have is a scene heading. Your scene headings are practical things for whoever is involved in your production. Your locations manager, for example, your screen headings give us vital information so that we understand the actual physical world and the practical world of the film as a production. So we always have exterior or interior. Either we're inside or we're outside. A car can never be an exterior, okay? It can be an interior because we can be within the car, but if your car is part of a shot, it's part of a larger exterior. So you would want to use something like exterior road, for example, or exterior parking lot. Okay, then you have the actual location. And here there's quite a lot of information because we're in a different country. We're in a prison, in a particular province, in a particular country. So you get all this big information first, then you get a smaller piece of information or a smaller space within that big space, which in this case is a courtyard. And here you have dawn. Now most of the time you're not going to have something as specific as dawn. Most of the time you will have day or you will have night. Usually day or night is enough information because it's one of these practical things for your locations manager, your producer, whatever, to know, okay, we have X number of exterior night shots, or we have X number of interior day shots. So day or night is usually enough. The reason that I chose to use dawn in this particular case is because that was really important in terms of the story. This is something that's happening at a very specific time. If you're writing a movie about vampires and we understand that as soon as night falls, people are going to start getting fangs, then you might say something like evening or dusk, because that's quite important practical information. But most of the time, day or night is going to be enough. Then we move into action. You want to keep your action writing as minimal as you can. Remember that a screenplay is not a novel, okay? Your talents as a prose writer might actually be a handicap to you writing good screenplays, because it's all about economy. It's all about giving the minimum information so that whoever's reading it understands the world that you're pulling them into. So give minimal information, but try to give information that suggests a mood, suggests tension, suggests a flavor of where we are. What I like to do when I'm writing is in a scene like this, which is quite tense because somebody's going to get executed, I got more and more minimal as I went along for pace, okay? But in a scene that's maybe got a more leisurely feel to it, a more relaxed feel, I let my sentences run on a little bit so that you're kind of varying the tempo of your screenplay. I think action writing is the biggest challenge for screenwriters, because this is where your ability to compress, but also your ability to speak in your screenwriter's voice comes in. Your characters are not you, so you can't put your words in your character's mouth as you would say them. But in a way, when you write screenplay action, that's your identity as a writer, your personality as a writer. But whatever you do, you want to be writing action that is minimal, but that really communicates the world of a particular scene. And if you can vary that mood and flavor throughout your script, then you're really writing good action. Let's go back again. So you'll see that we have these particular people capitalized. These are characters. Whenever you introduce a character in the action, you capitalize their whole name. You only do that once. It's a little different on some television shows, but in terms of screenwriting, screenplays, you only write their name in capitals once. You also describe them, and again, you want to keep this minimal, especially if it's a minor character. Here, I just chose to make the guy burly, and he's in his 40s. That's probably enough information for this particular character who has no lines. But say, for example, we're looking at a main character. Let's look at a main character. Here's a main character. Ali looks like he was chubby in a well-worn shirt and tie. Ali, capitalized because we've just met him, 50s, looks like he was born in the easy chair he's squeezed into. So a little bit more information there, and also information that isn't just a literal information. You try to convey a little bit of who your characters are through how you describe them. And then we're going to meet his wife, and she's going to be described too. Anxious, haunted-looking, thin-faced woman with greying hair. A couple of other things to bear in mind. I've chosen here, because this is on the TV screen, I chose to write in caps on the TV and then in the living room in caps, so that it's really clear to the reader what's on the television screen and what is in the main space, okay? Often what happens in our screenplays, we use another language, and again, you want to be super clear. So what I've chosen to do here is to use italics to indicate the foreign language. And before any of that began, I've written it here in the action and I've underlined it so that the reader understands when we get to these lines of dialogue that are in italics, these are spoken in a different language. Okay? Making sense so far? I want to go back and show you another little thing. In a big space, if you want to take us to a smaller space within the big space while we're still in the scene, you might capitalize it in the action, or you might use a shot. If you look in your screenplay program and look at elements, you'll see you get a drop-down menu. And here I selected shot and used that to illustrate in the gallows, on the gallows rather. Okay, let me see if I can find cut to, okay. So these are transitions. Cut to is a transition. Use transitions very, very sparingly. Most of the time we don't need them. Most of the time we understand when we move to another scene, we have to cut to that scene, right? That's how films are made, they're cut together. So most of the time we do not need to use a transition. I used it here as much for tension as anything else. We go from this moment of seeing that somebody's just been hanged and we cut to this. I used it for emphasis. I think I use it again later when we do a big jump from one country to another. Yeah, there's another cut to. And I did that to draw the reader's attention to this next scene heading, because the next scene heading is in a different country and happens 2 months later. And I wanted to make sure that the reader knew that. So sometimes you would use a transition for that purpose to say, we're going to make a big jump in time or space, and I want the reader not to just glaze over that, because people are often reading in a hurry. I want them to stop and I want them to know that. Similar thing was going on there with the italics, the italicis for the Farsi. Again, wrote it in the action, underlined it so that people knew. Okay, OS. OS means off screen. Off screen means that the character is physically present within the big space, but is not actually on camera, but they are there. So for example, in this particular situation, I'm on camera, so I'm talking, so you would just read it like regular dialogue. And if Totran here, who's off camera, were to say something and we were to hear it, that would be off screen or off camera. Yes?
So what's about the characters talking to each other in the phone?
Okay, phone call formatting. Phone calls are very interesting because, of course, we have often we have phone calls in our screenplays. And one of the on-site students has just asked about phone call formatting. There's a number of different ways that we can format a phone call. So here we have, on Adobe Story, we have a phone call format. So in this particular instance, there's also a flashback. I'll talk to you about flashbacks in a moment. So here we have phone call formatting. This is if you want both characters to be seen, okay? Phone calls obviously have one person on one line and one person on the other, right? And often in a movie, we will cut from this room to another room in another house, and we'll be going back and forth between the two characters talking. If that's the kind of phone call you've got on, this is how you format it. So here we have the scene heading. Here we have the action line. Sally, on phone, as a directive parenthetical. We want to be super clear. She answers the phone, she's on phone, she speaks. Then we go to the second location, which in this case is a road, an exterior road, day. He beams. Then James on phone, it's me. Then you do this really handy thing, intercut as required, underlined in capitals, or intercut as necessary, or even just intercut, okay? Then you write the dialogue as if it's regular dialogue, and here you have the rest of that phone call. All right? This means we're not spending endless time and wasting endless space with one scene heading, action dialogue, the next scene heading, action dialogue, and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and before you know it, you've wasted 10 pages, right? And as we know, we don't have 10 pages to waste in screenplays. Yeah, give me 1 second. So what we do is we have the conversation written as if it is just dialogue between two people in the same space, and then the director or the editor makes the decision when to show either of those spaces. And when we come to the end of the phone call, we simply have end intercut, underlined again, written as action, so that it's super clear to the reader where that phone call and where that interaction between these two characters and these two scenes is finished. All right? Yes?
Actually, I think I answered my own question.
Okay, so no question there. All right. Imagine then that you wanted to write a scene where we didn't see both sides of the conversation. I've seen this done lots of different ways. I've seen it done with a VO, which I personally don't think it's right, because I think a voiceover usually means narration or inner thoughts, as opposed to something that we can then hear. I've seen people use OS, off screen, which I also don't think is right because they're not physically in the space. The way that I like to do it is, here we go, Sally on phone, hello, and then James's voice on phone as a character slug to tell us that we're hearing his voice. Now, different people have different attitudes about this. This is the method that I particularly like because I think it's the clearest. Double check with your instructor as to which method they would prefer you to use, because again, this isn't one of those hard and fast rules that are one of the screenplays. You cannot do it another way. As far as I've been able to observe, there's a number of different ways to do it. I do it this way because I think it's the clearest way, but you guys might have your own way. Talk to your instructor about it, see if they think your way is okay, and be consistent with it. That's something that's very important to understand with any of the conventions of screenwriting. If you've decided you're going to format that kind of phone call that way, and you do it again in your script, keep doing it the same way, all right? As long as you establish your method or a method that you're going to use. If it's something like this, where there's a little bit of give and take, continue to do it the same way throughout that particular script. Any more questions on phone calls? Okay, so I have a question from Abigail online. Abigail has a scene in a TV pilot where a guy is on the phone, he pulls his headset away, and we can hear the guy on the other end. How would I format that? I think what I would do, Abigail, I would do something like this, like James' voice on headset, for example, because physically we're not seeing the person is not off screen, it's not a voiceover, so I would do something like, oh damn. Something like that. I would just check again with your instructor to see whether or not he or she agrees with this particular suggestion. But I think I read that, I get it, yeah? Or James' voice on headset or whatever. Double check with your instructor, but this I think is clear enough and tells us what we're hearing and that there's not a person physically in the space, so we do not need to indicate anything in action. Okay, how would I format narration versus voiceover, especially if they are two different people, main character and someone else? Okay, narration is voiceover, all right? Now, narration need not be from a character in your script. So, for example, imagine that you had a narrator who wasn't physically a person in your story, was just the narrator, all right? I would do it like this. Oops, not like that, like that. Because I think that's really, really clear. If it's, say you wanted to indicate the gender, maybe you want to say female narrator. We understand that that person is the narrator. We will accept if they do not have a physical role in the film, because you've established that that is what they do. They are the narrator. And they might say once upon a time. For example, if you have a main character, then let's say the main character is James, and you just write VO again. Okay? Now obviously James is going to be in the action, so you would introduce James in the action either before or after he speaks, but this would be fine for a narrator. This would be fine if James was doing the narrating. And you could perfectly feasibly have both. You could have a narrator who's out with the story, and you can also have a character who narrates too. Yes, we have another question.
If James is doing the voiceover and he hasn't been introduced as like a narrator, do you
Take the mic.
to, like, name him as, if James is doing the voiceover but you haven't introduced him as a character yet, do you want to name him as James, or do you want to
I
name
would.
him as narrator? Okay.
I would, because remember, whoever's watching your movie isn't reading the scene headings.
Right.
So I don't think there's anything to be gained by not revealing that James is the person doing the narration.
Okay.
And James could narrate, for example, like here, and then we could, for example, James. For example, yeah?
Right.
And maybe you would have a scene heading before that, of course, because you need the scene heading. So let's say interior. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, now would that go for even if it wasn't a voiceover, even if it was like just a character that hadn't been introduced yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
You mean you would just do an off-screen, for example? Is that what you mean?
Like if the character hasn't specifically been named yet in the action, and then you would just name it.
Yeah, you might do this. Oops. This is how I would do it. Okay, you've said a man sits in the dark. You just want to reveal that that man is James.
Okay.
How I would do it would be this, right?
Okay.
Then you're making it really, really clear to the reader that it's the same character. But what you've tried to do here is you've tried to give it a bit of mystery. And remember that your screenplay is not just a technical document, it's a reading experience too. And you want whoever's reading it to get pulled in. And if you want to get a little bit of mystery going, then that would be absolutely fine. Okay? Another thing that commonly comes up is flashbacks, fantasy sequences. How do we take care of them? All right. So again, because it's all about clarity, I begin with this. In the action, all caps, underlined, begin flashback sequence. The same would be true of begin fantasy sequence, begin daydream, begin nightmare, begin flash forward. Whatever it is you're doing, label it up the front. And then tell us where we are. But equally important in a flashback, tell us when we are, all right? Put at the end of the scene slug in brackets. Tell us, in this case, it's 3 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years in the future. Whatever it is, make sure you label it. Then you write it as a regular scene, and then when the flashback sequence or the dream sequence or the fantasy sequence is over, just tell us end flashback, end dream sequence, then go back into a regular scene, and you don't need to write present, okay? You can assume that the reader understands it's the present because you've ended the flashback, all right? You'll probably see there are a number of different ways of doing this. This is my way because I think it's really, really clear. Nobody's going to have a nervous breakdown if you say present, all right? That's okay. You could probably then take this out, but I think this keeps it really, really clear, and it's all about clarity. Any questions about flashbacks or dream sequences or any of that stuff? Okay, directive parentheticals. Directive parentheticals are when you are giving the actor, the director, extra information that isn't obvious from the dialogue itself. For example, in this case, we have in a land far away, all right? So let's say that we want to say that imagine that he's actually being funny. Maybe you would want to write something like in a mocking tone, okay? Because that tells us something that we couldn't have deduced. Imagine he had said, let's change it to him saying, okay, changes it quite a lot, right? Because you read it, you think, I love you, okay, fair enough, thank you. But now, because we put sarcastically in as a directive parenthetical, we understand that there is a slightly different intonation. You can also use this for tiny little bits of action. So for example, maybe you wanted to say fixing his tie, yeah? And you didn't want to give it, because it's not that important, right? And you didn't want to give another action line. You could use that as a directive parentheticals. Do not overuse directive parentheticals. Sometimes I'll get a student script and I will see like every other line has a directive parenthetical, and it breaks up the read, and it's unnecessary because most of the time your dialogue is going to tell us exactly what's going on. For example, look, here we are. James, how are you? Like you care. You know I do. Well, I don't. It's fairly unequivocal, right? You read that, you understand she's not very happy, okay? So we do not need to put any, let's say you wanted to put angry. You see how much that breaks up the read? And plus, that wastes 4 lines, yeah? So imagine that you're doing this all the way through your screenplay, you're wasting line after line giving information that is already totally evident to the reader from reading your script. All right, any questions about directive parentheticals? Okay, we have some questions online. Okay, when should it be used? Spec scripts only. Simone, if you could just give me a little information about when should it be used, I'll be happy to answer that question. Tess asking, how would I format a character time traveling to multiple places one after another? Just a scene heading before each place? Yeah, probably, because if we keep moving in place, what you might have to do is, this is a case that you might use, let's imagine that you were ending flashback, and this is, I would suggest what you do is, if we're having multiple, I would do it like this. Begin time travel sequence. And then I would have, I think you probably have to use these to emphasize to the reader, because otherwise they might miss it. Whoops. That's really clear, right? And I think you probably have to do that all the way through, just so that you made sure that your reader didn't get lost. So I would continue to do that, and then I would, at the end of your dream sequence, I would just write something like your time travel sequence, end time travel sequence. Okay, Tess, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, Simone, you put it in one of my films for class. The teacher said not to include them. If you could tell me what them is, I'll be more than happy to answer that question. Do we have any questions? People here in the room. Okay, the people in the room, what I would like you to do now is I would like you to take an assignment that you have right now. Yes, okay, so Simone's asking about parentheticals. I think use parentheticals very, 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 very rarely. Look at your dialogue. Do you need the directive parentheticals, or is there enough information in the dialogue? The screenplay for There Will Be Blood, which won the Oscar for Best Screenplay, is something like 122 pages long and has not one directive parenthetical. None. Doesn't need them because the dialogue is eloquent enough to say exactly what is going on. Okay? Even when it's subtext. So use directive parentheticals very rarely. Only if you absolutely have to. A good trick is to leave them out and read the scene, or even get someone to read it and say, okay, does it make sense? Does it do what I intended it to do? Okay, we have a question.
If I'm like starting my script with a black screen and like noises happening, would I just put like a black screen and then put the noises in action and then put like the fade in and then the...
Yeah, I would think, yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones where I've seen it done a million different ways. So maybe you might write over black. You might just even write over black, yeah? A car crash, a scream, then nothing. Oops. Don't ever use we, sorry. And maybe you don't even need fade in. Maybe then you might just go to, I don't know, that looks a little bold to me. What you might want to do is a transition. Maybe. I'm not totally convinced by that. I'm going to do a little bit more investigation while we're in the room, but that might work. Or you might just get to this. I don't know. That seems a little bit unscientific, so I'm going to do a bit of investigation. But that's kind of what you mean, right? Is you want us to see nothing on the screen. It's on a black screen, right?
Yeah.
And then we're hearing these things, but we're not seeing anything. And then we're going to that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like we need more here just to get us to that next. Do you look at that and understand what's going on? Yeah?
Yeah.
So it might be one of these instances where we do need to use a transition where this tells us what we're actually seeing, which is nothing, yeah? and then we're hearing all this stuff, and then we're actually going to scene 1. So that might work. I will do some looking, and then get back to you with an answer. Is there a particular film that already exists that you've seen do this?
I was reading in one of the books I got for class, and one of the sample scripts it had was a black screen and then noises, and I liked it for.
Right, and how was that done?
Just like a black screen, the action line, and then right to the scene, like exterior.
Okay,
Whatever.
all right. I think as long as you're clear, then it's probably okay.
Okay.
But I'll do some investigation. Any other questions from people in the room? Yes.
So what if in this story the character is telling a story or legacy, and we want to show the story he tell? So how to?
So let's go back to James if he's still here. Okay, right, so let's say it's exterior field day. Maybe you want to put in let's say it's some time in the past. Let's say it's 1850. Maybe you're going to say it's in Texas. And it's James, right? Okay. Does that make sense? I think a cut to, you might even get away without the cut to, because begin story sequence probably tells us enough. And then we go into the story and we're using the voiceover. Okay, so Patrick has a question, which is music lyrics, where a song is written or performed, a scene where a singer-songwriter breaks into music or recites music lyrics as in my scene described above. So let's imagine that James is singing. I would put singing, and then I would put the lyrics in italics to differentiate from dialogue. Now, even the most careless reader in the world, and believe me, they are out there, can't really miss this because you've done it twice. You've said singing, and then you've italicized the lyrics. So very, very clear. Again, it's just about clarity. It's just about making sure the reader understands what you're trying to do, telling them as clearly and succinctly as you can, and then continuing to do it through the script. So say in Patrick's script, imagine this character is going to sing a lot. You've established that this is how you write lyrics, and you've also used singing, so you would do that throughout. Okay? Tess has another question, which is, okay, you have two characters getting to know each other over time, and you want to show that in a montage. Okay, right, montages. So montages are interesting. Again, it's about the clarity. So I would say you begin montage. Now, often what happens is montages are titled. So say, for example, they fall out of love. Whoops, they fall out of love. So you don't have to title your montage, but I've seen it done. I would write it like this because you don't really want to write full scenes. Maybe interior. Oops. Okay, so this is doing it as a scene heading, and I want it as action. Okay, I want this as action, and I'm just going to try and reset it as. I'm going to leave this for the moment, and I'll figure out how to do it later. But essentially test what you would do, although you could probably write these all as scene headings, but it wouldn't be quite right. I think what you would do is you would just label every place, and if it's night or day, and then again you would want to always end montage. And then you go back to regular scenes. Oh, I don't know why that's not in montage. And you would underline this, which doesn't appear to be doing it. Right, there we go. Okay, so I would write all of this as action, except you're using scene slug language, but that would work because that's really, really clear. But I would prefer to put these in regular, like regular case, like they squabble, over pizza. That's what I would prefer to do. Poetry's the same. Yes, Patrick's asking if it's okay to quote lyrics and poetry. Okay, the trouble with quoting from someone else's work is copyright. If you, for example, you decided, I want to use a Beatles song in my film, well, you better have a lot of money, right? The same is true of poetry, although poetry is probably going to cost a bit less. But someone else owns these words, someone else owns the music. Really, you only have to use a particular poem or a particular song if it moves your plot along, all right? Most of the time, you might say something like, a song like Drake's Hotline Bling comes on, for example, right? Because maybe you're trying to suggest the mood. Obviously, if it's your song, if it's your poetry, you can do what you like, and I would use the italicis stuff, you know. To indicate that she's reciting, okay? Sorry. Okay, right. I would use italics to tell us that we're reciting, but if it's someone else's work, unless it's in the public domain means that it's available for anyone to use. All of Shakespeare is in the public domain, for example. Wuthering Heights is in the public domain, for example. I think the public domain is 180 years. I can't remember. It's slightly different in the United Kingdom, where I'm from. But you want to make sure that you are able to use it. But more importantly, do you need to use it? Can you get away with saying, he puts on a piece of music like, so that the reader understands that you want that particular type of music? Also remember, the reader might not actually know the piece of music that you're talking about, so it might just be a waste of words. So use lyrics, use poems if they advance your plot, if you're fairly sure you can get the permission to use them. If they're your own, that's perfectly fine. But ordinarily, if you're going to use lyrics or poetry, you want to ensure that you have the ability to use it, because otherwise you're violating rights, and if you try and use it in your film, you might get sued. A young filmmaker, made a short film recently called Thunder Road, in which he used a Bruce Springsteen song, and it won a ton of awards at festivals, and luckily Bruce Springsteen was all right with it. He made the film and then said to Bruce Springsteen, "Is this okay?" Which was a big risk, right? Because it's a lot of money to make, even a short film, and Bruce Springsteen was all right about it, but he might not have been all right about it, in which case you've got a film that you cannot use. I have another question to ask. Okay, do we need to register or copyright scripts, or is that for another class? Okay, so copyright. When you think your script is good enough, you can register with the WGA. You can register your script with the WGA, which is the Writers Guild of America, West, which is in LA. I think it's $20 to register your script, and that's really good to do before you send your script out to the world. You want to make sure that your work is protected. So you've written your script, it's ready to go out into the world. Go to www.wga.com. Let's just check. Oh, not there. Okay, Writers Guild of America, let's find it. All right, WG.org, okay. Yeah, here we go. You don't need to be a member to register your script. There's lots of interesting information here. And somewhere here, that register your script. You go here, register your script. Tells you what registration is and how it protects your work. And then you can submit it. I think it's okay. It tells you how to do it, what you can register. $20. It's very, very good value, and it protects your script. So that's a good thing for you to do. When you're ready, don't do it with multiple drafts, because you're going to spend a fortune. Wait until you've got a draft that is ready to go out into the world, and then register it with the WGA, which means your work is protected. Okay?